At 7,730 feet above sea level in the mountains west of Colorado Springs, Colorado, a black iron gate blocks the mouth of a tunnel that has not let a single car pass through it since 1988. The road on the other side of that gate still exists. You can see it, cracked and grown over, curving into the dark. For 37 years, the city has left it exactly like this. Barricaded, unrepaired, off limits to every vehicle in the state. Most roads that get damaged in Colorado eventually get fixed. This one didn't. And the story of why involves a gold rush, a president's offhand remark, one collapsing tunnel, and a piece of folklore so persistent that people still drive up here at night specifically to be afraid of it. This is Gold Camp Road, and before we go further, it's worth knowing exactly where you are because knowing the terrain is the only thing that keeps you safe on it. The canyon it runs through, North Cheyenne Canyon, sits at the southwestern edge of Colorado Springs, where the flat Great Plains stop abruptly and the front range of the Rocky Mountains begins. The bedrock down at the mouth of the canyon is soft gray Pierre shale. Climb higher, and it gives way to hard granite, weathered over millions of years into the pale, spire-shaped formations that make this drive famous in photographs and treacherous behind a steering wheel. That granite doesn't erode evenly. It fractures into towers and overhangs, which is exactly the kind of rock you'd choose if you wanted to blast a railroad tunnel through a mountain, and exactly the kind of rock that, a century later, starts to let go. If you're watching this from somewhere with real guardrails and real cell service, consider yourself lucky. And consider subscribing before we head into the canyon, because we cover roads like this every week. And I'd genuinely like to know if you've ever driven something like it yourself. Now, back to the mountain. Gold Camp Road did not begin as a road at all. It began as steel rail, laid down in the final years of the 19th century to solve a very specific, very lucrative problem. Cripple Creek and Victor, two mining towns high in the Front Range, were sitting on one of the richest gold deposits ever discovered in North America. The ore was up there. The smelters, the banks, and the railheads were down in Colorado Springs. Somebody had to build a way to move tons of rock and metal between the two, through terrain that gains roughly 3,000 feet of elevation in under 20 miles, across canyon walls of solid granite that don't yield to a shovel. Older routes into the district, like the narrow gauge lines that already served Cripple Creek, wound miles out of their way to find gentler grades, adding hours to every trip and dollars to every ton of ore shipped. The answer to that problem was the Colorado Springs and Cripple Creek District Railway, nicknamed the Short Line for how directly it cut through the mountains, instead of looping around them the way older routes did. Crews began blasting through granite on a course that would eventually require 9 separate tunnels, carved by hand and dynamite through rock that had been sitting there undisturbed for hundreds of millions of years. Passenger service began in 1901. The ride became famous almost immediately, not for danger, but for scenery. Theodore Roosevelt is said to have ridden it and remarked that the view along the route bankrupts the English language, a line that Colorado Springs has repeated in tourism material ever since, whether or not the president said it in exactly those words. The gold didn't last. By the early 1920s, the richest veins around Cripple Creek were thinning out, freight volume was dropping, and the railway was no longer worth running as a railroad. In 1922, it was sold at auction. The new owners tore up the tracks, graded the roadbed, and reopened the route in 1924 as the Corley Mountain Highway, a private toll road built specifically so that a new invention, the automobile, could drive through the same 9 tunnels that trains once used. For 15 years, you paid a toll to make this drive. Then, on May 6, 1939, ownership passed to the public, and Gold Camp Road became free to anyone with a car and a reason to head into the mountains. For the next 49 years, it stayed that way. Locals drove the full 32 miles between Colorado Springs and Victor. It became one of the signature scenic drives of the region, a narrow, winding, mostly unpaved corridor threading between granite spires, climbing past 9,000 feet, running for long stretches with a rock wall on one side and a drop of several hundred feet on the other, and no guardrail on either side to remind you of the difference. The road did what it was built to do. It moved people through a landscape that had never been friendly to movement. Understand why that matters mechanically, not just scenically. A railroad grade is built for a machine that runs on fixed rails at a constant, predictable speed, with no steering input required at all. When that same grade gets converted into a road for automobiles, the curves stay exactly as tight as they were for a train, because regrading solid granite is enormously expensive. But now, a fallible human being has to steer through them under variable traction, in the dark, sometimes after a drink. The tunnels were carved to a single-track rail gauge, which means they are barely wide enough for one car, with no shoulder and no room for error if a vehicle is coming the other direction. And because the road was never repaved to modern highway standards along most of its length, the surface itself shifts constantly between packed dirt, loose gravel, and exposed rock, without warning and without signage to tell a driver which one is coming next. Every one of those design decisions made sense for a railroad in 1901. None of them were built with a car's ability to skid, overcorrect, or lose traction in mind. Then, in 1988, without warning, the mountain took a piece of it back. Tunnel 3 sits roughly halfway up the lower stretch of the drive, a granite bore that had carried rail traffic and then car traffic for close to 90 years by the time it failed. The tunnel's internal supports, timber beams installed when the passage was first cut, had spent nearly a century absorbing moisture, freezing, thawing, and slowly rotting from the inside. In 1988, a section of that support structure finally gave way, and part of the tunnel's roof came down. Nobody was inside when it happened. There is no police report, no coroner's record, and no contemporaneous news account of any vehicle, let alone any bus, being caught in the collapse. What is documented is simpler and, in its own way, more unsettling. A tunnel that had held for generations simply stopped holding, and the city of Colorado Springs decided correctly that it wasn't worth the risk to fix it. So they didn't. Engineers fenced off both mouths of the tunnel with black steel gates, rerouted foot and bicycle traffic around the collapse, and left the middle section of Gold Camp Road. From Tunnel 3 onward, through several more tunnels toward the old mining district, permanently closed to cars. Nearly 4 decades later, that decision still stands. You can walk to the gate. You can bike around it on a detour trail the city built for exactly that purpose. You cannot drive through it, and you never will again, because nobody has ever decided it makes financial or safety sense to rebuild a 100-year-old railroad tunnel through solid granite for a scenic back road. That single, quiet engineering decision, made in 1988 with no fanfare and almost no news coverage, is the entire reason Gold Camp Road exists today in 2 disconnected pieces instead of one continuous drive. It's also the reason this place became something else entirely. Not just an abandoned stretch of infrastructure, but one of the most persistently rumored haunted locations in the state of Colorado. Here's where the story the internet tells you and the story the record actually supports start to diverge. And it's worth sitting with that gap for a moment because it tells you something about how legends get built on top of real tragedy. even when the tragedy itself never happened. The version you'll hear if you ask almost anyone in Colorado Springs about Tunnel 3 goes like this. A school bus, sometimes described as carrying orphans, sometimes simply students, was driving through the tunnel in 1988 when the roof came down on top of it. Everyone aboard died instantly, the driver included. Ever since, hikers and cyclists who pass the sealed tunnel report hearing children laughing somewhere inside the dark. Some claim to find small handprints pressed into the condensation on their car windows after driving through the tunnels that remain open. A few say the laughter changes the closer you get to the gate into something closer to screaming. It's a good story. It has been repeated in local news features, ghost hunting web pages, and dozens of amateur videos filmed at night with a flashlight pointed at a rusted fence. And after searching newspaper archives, state transportation records, and coroner reporting from El Paso County, there is no evidence any of it happened. No missing bus, no names, no obituaries, no lawsuit, which is itself telling. Because an accident that killed an entire busload of children in 1988 would have generated one of the largest wrongful death cases in the state's history, and there is no trace of it anywhere. Multiple researchers who have gone looking for a primary source on the bus story have come back with the same conclusion. It does not appear to be real. What almost certainly happened instead is far less cinematic. A support beam rotted. A roof fell in an empty tunnel on an otherwise unremarkable day. And into the vacuum left by an unremarkable explanation, people built something more satisfying. A tragedy with victims. A reason to feel a chill walking past the gate at dusk. That's a common pattern at abandoned infrastructure all over the country. A place goes quiet. A fence goes up. And within a generation, the quiet itself gets reinterpreted as evidence that something terrible must have happened there. It's worth knowing this distinction going in, because everything that follows in this story, every real incident on this road, deserves to be told with the same accuracy that the bus story doesn't get. Because Gold Camp Road, ghost story aside, has produced real accidents, real injuries, and at least one real documented death, and those deserve to be told straight, without embellishment, the way the people who lived through them actually experienced them. Start with a Sunday night in 2016. A 24-year-old man was hiking, or possibly climbing, in the terrain along Gold Camp Road when he lost his footing and fell approximately 40 feet. He suffered severe head trauma in the fall. Emergency crews got him to a hospital, but he did not survive his injuries. His name was never released publicly. What's documented is the fall itself, the distance, the outcome, and the fact that it happened on ground that looks from a car window like nothing more than a scenic overlook. 40 feet doesn't sound like much until you understand what 40 feet of loose granite and open air actually means for a person who takes one wrong step near the edge. Move forward to April of 2019. Just before 10 at night, 28-year-old Kiefer Tomlinson was driving a Jeep Wrangler north along Gold Camp Road with a passenger beside him. Colorado State Patrol later said Tomlinson lost control of the vehicle. The Jeep left the roadway, rolled multiple times, and came to a stop at the bottom of a canyon. Both men were wearing their seat belts, which investigators would later credit with limiting the severity of their injuries. Tomlinson sustained moderate injuries. His passengers were serious. Alcohol was suspected as a contributing factor, and charges against the driver were pending. It's a pattern that shows up again and again on roads like this one. A driver who knows the curves, until suddenly they don't, at exactly the speed where knowing them stops mattering. 2 months later, in June of 2019, it happened again on a different section of the same road. 19-year-old Nathan Corser was driving an SUV eastbound on the paved lower portion of Gold Camp Road, heading toward the city when he missed a curve. The vehicle rolled down a hillside and came to rest in a stand of trees. Police said speed and alcohol both contributed. One passenger suffered serious injuries. The crash shut the road down for 7 hours while investigators worked the scene, a stretch of time that gives you some sense of just how far off the pavement a vehicle can travel once it leaves a road with a drop instead of a shoulder. In September of 2022, the road produced one of its more dramatic single-vehicle crashes near a scenic overlook called Point Sublime. A vehicle went off the left side of the roadway and tumbled down the embankment, rolling over multiple times before it finally stopped, roughly 500 feet below the road surface. The driver was ejected during the rollover. Colorado Springs Fire Department's high-angle rescue team, a unit specifically trained and equipped for exactly this kind of vertical terrain, had to lower personnel down the slope to reach the patient and bring them back up. The driver was listed in critical condition. 500 feet is not a distance most vehicles are built to survive falling, even in stages, even bouncing off rock and brush along the way. And the fact that the driver lived is a testament less to the road's forgiveness and more to the specific training of the crews who work it. Rescues like that one are not routine anywhere else in the city. On Gold Camp Road, the fire department trains for them specifically because the terrain guarantees they will eventually be needed again. If you've made it this far into the story, you already understand something important about this road that a lot of scenic drive guides leave out. The danger here isn't concentrated at one dramatic point, like a single hairpin curve or a famous overlook. It's distributed across the entire route, in the total absence of guardrails, in a surface that shifts between pavement, packed dirt, and loose gravel without warning, and in drop-offs that a driver only fully understands the moment their tires stop gripping the road. Look at the incidents together, rather than one at a time, and a pattern emerges that traffic investigators would recognize from mountain roads all over the American West. Alcohol shows up repeatedly. Nighttime shows up repeatedly. So does a driver's familiarity with the route, the specific dangerous confidence that comes from having made the same curve successfully 100 times before, right up until the 101st attempt. None of that makes Gold Camp Road unique. What makes it unique is the consequence attached to each of those ordinary human mistakes. On a flat suburban street, missing a curve at speed means hitting a curb or a mailbox. On Gold Camp Road, it can mean the bottom of a canyon or 500 feet of open air where a shoulder should be. We're at the midpoint of this story now, and before we head into what Gold Camp Road looks like today, it's worth pausing to say that if any of this has been useful or unsettling in the right way, subscribing helps this channel keep finding roads like it. Now, back to the mountain. The crashes didn't stop as the years went on, and neither did the road's underlying instability. In March of 2025, another vehicle rolled off Gold Camp Road, this time on the paved section closer to the city, before the road climbs into North Cheyenne Canyon. Witnesses saw the car go off the road and ran downhill to reach it, calling emergency services while the vehicle came to rest partway down the slope. Colorado Springs Fire Department crews extricated one victim and transported them by ambulance. It's a smaller incident than some of the others in scale, but it's a useful reminder that Gold Camp Road doesn't need its dirt, high-altitude, unguarded stretches to produce a serious crash. Even the paved approach, the part most drivers assume is the safe part, has claimed vehicles. And then in June of 2025, the mountain reminded everyone that Gold Camp Road's instability isn't confined to a single collapsed tunnel from 1988. After nearly 2 weeks of rain, with the local airport reporting measurable precipitation on 12 of the previous 14 days, floodwater tore through North Cheyenne Creek and destroyed a section of the neighboring canyon road, ripping pavement away and undermining the roadbed to the point where creek water was visibly rushing beneath a collapsed section of asphalt. City officials closed both entrances to North Cheyenne Canyon Park while they assessed the damage, and Gold Camp Road itself was closed to everyone except local residents for the duration of the assessment. It's a different failure than the one that sealed Tunnel 3 37 years earlier, caused by water instead of rot. But it comes from the same underlying truth about this canyon. The ground here has never fully stabilized, and every few years, it reminds the people who drive through it. So what does Gold Camp Road actually look like now if you were to go there today? It exists as two separate driving experiences connected by a walking and biking corridor that used to be a single continuous highway. From the Colorado Springs side, Lower Gold Camp Road climbs out of North Cheyenne Canyon Park on a mix of pavement and well-maintained gravel, narrow enough in places that two vehicles have to negotiate who yields, but passable in any standard passenger car. It threads through Tunnels 1 and 2, both still open, both still just wide enough for a single vehicle at a time, with a short wait sometimes required if a car is already coming the other direction. Then, at Tunnel 3, the road simply stops. A parking area accommodates hikers, cyclists, and motorcyclists who can continue on foot or two wheels past the black steel gate, around the collapsed tunnel on a detour trail, and onward through Tunnels 4, 5, and 6. Some of which have also partially failed over the decades and are themselves fenced off from entry. Roughly 22 miles farther along at the road's southern terminus near Old Stage Road, Gold Camp Road picks back up as a drivable route again, continuing west through Tunnel 9 and on toward Victor and Cripple Creek, the same mining towns the Short Line Railroad was built to serve well over a century ago. In other words, you can still, technically, drive the beginning and the end of the original route. You simply can no longer drive the middle, and you never will again, not because anyone forgot about it, but because in 1988, a tunnel collapsed under its own weight, and the calculation of what it would cost to fix versus what it would cost to simply close it permanently was never close. The land the lower stretch of the road passes through has its own separate history worth knowing. North Cheyenne Canyon Park, the gateway most drivers use to reach Gold Camp Road from Colorado Springs, exists today because railroad magnate William Jackson Palmer, the same man who founded Colorado Springs itself, donated more than 1,200 acres of mountain land to the city for public parkland in the decades around 1900. That donation is why the Lower Canyon, with its waterfalls, hiking trails, and the paved approach to the first two tunnels, remains free and open to the public more than a century later, even as the road running through it has been cut in half by a collapse nobody could have scheduled or prevented. Today, the closed middle section sees a very different kind of traffic than it did as a highway. Mountain bikers grinding up the same grade the trains once used. Hikers heading for the Seven Bridges Trail that splits off partway up the canyon. And every October, hunters for a ghost story that the historical record says never happened. What's left in that middle section has become something the original railroad builders and the toll road operators who followed them could never have anticipated. A landmark defined less by where it goes than by the fact that it doesn't go anywhere anymore. Every year, people hike or bike the closed stretch specifically to see the sealed mouth of Tunnel 3. Many of them chasing a story about a bus and a busload of children that the historical record simply does not support. They still report the sounds. They still report the handprints. Whatever is actually happening up there, whether it's imagination working on a genuinely eerie piece of infrastructure, acoustic tricks common to any long stone tunnel, or something people can't fully explain, it happens on a road whose real verified history is dramatic enough without any embellishment at all. A railroad built through solid granite by hand. A president who may or may not have said it defied language. A toll road. A free road. 49 years of open travel. And then one collapsing beam that closed half the route forever. We opened this video standing in front of a black iron gate at 7,730 feet, looking at a tunnel nobody has driven through since 1988. That gate is still there right now, rusting slowly at the edges, exactly where the city left it 37 years ago. It will likely still be there in another 37 because nothing about the underlying math has changed. The tunnel is still unstable. The cost of fixing it still isn't worth it for a scenic back road. And the road on the other side, cracked and reclaimed by weeds, will keep sitting exactly where it stopped, going nowhere for as long as the mountain wants to keep it that way. No busload of children ever died at that gate, but real people have gone off this road in real cars, on real nights, and at least one of them never came home. That's the part worth remembering the next time somebody tells you the story with the ghosts in it. If you drive the parts of Gold Camp Road that are still open, respect every curve of it. There is no guardrail up there to stop you from becoming the next documented incident on this road. Only your own judgment and the traction under your tires. If you've ever driven this one yourself, or you've got a road near you with a story like this, tell us in the comments. We'd like to hear it.